Yeah, so just to set a little bit of context on this, some people, I know some people in this room, other people I perhaps don't know. Those people that do know me probably know that last couple of years I had some quite serious health issues, life-threatening, in fact, health issues. And I was actually very ill for about a year or so. And after having sort of major surgery and chemotherapy and radiotherapy and all that kind of stuff, I was trying, you know, I was coming back into the world again. And one of the places that really kind of made me feel alive again basically was the Railway Hotel, because I don't know if there are many, I know that there's a couple of railway faces I've seen in here, but people who know the railway, it's not just a pub, it's kind of a live music venue. They have all kinds of community activities going on there. They've got a writers group there. I think they host sort of Green Party or they have hosted Green Party meetings in the past. All sorts of creativity goes on around there. There's filmmaking, you know, there's filmmaking collectors. I think it's about 3 or 4 radio stations run out the pub. And so every time we go in there, there's just this amazing, like, life-affirming, creative vibe. I mean, people knock Southend. People say, oh, Southend, what an awful town. But the railway is one of the examples of, you know, why I love living in Southend. And for me personally, it was a place that actually started off this great long period of illness where everything seemed so grim and dull and grey and lifeless for a long time. It kind of brought me back into the world again, if you like. So I felt kind of like owed something to that pub in a way, which might sound a bit odd. But so anyway, this story begins with, the genesis of this story just comes from one of those pub chats that people have, you know, and I was chatting to Dave, who's the manager of the pub. And like I say, there is very much a community vibe there. And, you know, we just got talking about permaculture and organic gardening and all that kind of thing. And Dave said, yeah, you know, one day we'd like to grow, you know, some organic veg in the back of the pub, you know, that'd be great. And I was like, sort of, yeah, Dave, that's going to happen. But it's like, you know, this is what the back garden of the railway was like. It's this complete tip. You know, there's always old furniture and rubbish and complete low, you know, it was just completely a dumping ground, you know. So that's the garden seating in the garden. So it doesn't look very promising, does it? But it was one of those kind of, you know, it was kind of one of those pub chats that go on, you know how it is, you know, people have wonderful ideas in the pub, but that's kind of the end of it. But for me it's like, you know, Dave saying, yeah, we like to grow that, but for me it's like that kind of, well, yeah, let's make it happen, Dave, let's do it. So got kind of chatting, and I also work with a place called Project 49, also known as the Hub in Alexander Street, which is like a community base for people with learning disabilities. What we're trying to do there is get away from some of the old-fashioned models of day centres where people kind of, you know, almost like segregate from the community, and they're in these day centres that are tucked out on the edge of town and nobody really sees what's going on, and there's not really much community interaction. Very much at the heart of what we're doing at Project 49 is trying to get people back into the community and engage with like community type projects. And at Project 49 it's quite a new place, it's only been up and running for about a year. And at the back, it's in Alexander Street in Southend. And at the back there's a tiny little courtyard that, you know, we try and run gardening groups in. But it's such a tiny little space, you know, there would normally be about 10 or 15 people trying to do a kind of couple of little jobs in this very compact, not very inspiring, not very large area. So it just made total sense, like, you know, you guys have got this space, this garden that needs kind of sorting out. We've got people who kind of need activities, why don't we just, you know, bring the two together? Which is what permaculture is all about, really. It's about making connections, bringing things together and making those kind of making things happen. So initially myself and my line manager and the manager of the railway, we had a kind of chat and we sort of thrashed it out. We were saying, well, basically, you know, we can't really do anything until, you know, some of this rubbish is cleared. So they got skipping and quite quickly, you know, cleared the space. So we kind of knew what we had to work with then. Up until then it was very difficult, it was very dangerous to try and actually manoeuvre around there. So once the space was cleared, there's a couple of our guys from the project sort of doing a bit of measuring. So the first step was basically to measure up the space. Let's see what we've got. The first step in any kind of permaculture design is see what you've got first of all, what's already there. So we kind of measured up the space a bit. There's a couple of our guys having fun with tape measures, working it all out, and we kind of drew up a very rough sort of base map there. So at least we've got, see we've kind of got the dimensions there of the space. So we kind of knew what we had to play with, as it were. And again, so this is very rough at this stage. We're just making some very rough notes and what have you. And that's just a sketch of like the back of the pub. So we've got that back wall of the pub. So we've got some ideas of where, water, where the kind of downpipes were for potential water harvesting, that kind of stuff. And which brings us on to, now we kind of gather that information, we know that stuff, we can start thinking in terms of the actual design. And there's kind of another thing, not just in permaculture, but anywhere. If you're doing a design, it's always good to be on site, spend as much time on site as possible. So we're better to work on the design than in the pub. So, just see me, this is me starting to kind of work out a design kind of thing. So here's like a little kind of mind map with some of those design ideas. So I was thinking about what were the aims of the project. You can see one of the branches there is the aims. So there was the aims in terms of what we wanted to achieve for our guys, guys at the Project 49. So things like, as I mentioned before, it's about community integration, it's about inclusion, it's about meaningful activities, it's about learning skills that people perhaps didn't have before. It's about, just community engagement really. So those are sort of, and it's also about, also about the healthy eating agenda, sort of getting people more aware of, actually being in touch with the food they're growing, and all those kind of issues around healthy eating, that sort of thing. Then there was in terms of like the pub itself, what were the needs of the, what were the aims in terms of the pub, and again, it's about the pub wanting to have, community engagement and sort of being engaged with our guys, that sort of thing. And possibly at this stage we were talking in terms of maybe, growing a bit of organic food. I don't know if anyone's actually eaten the rower. They've got probably one of the best sort of vegan, vegetarian menus in the area. Dale, the chef's actually like a Michelin-starred chef, and we thought it'd be great if we could actually grow the food that's then being kind of sold in the pub, sort of thing. So that, at that time that was one of our kind of aims, sort of thing. And also there was kind of an agenda really of having a bit of a, which I'll probably perhaps talk about more towards the end, actually having a bit of a showpiece garden really, in terms of a demonstration that what you can actually grow. Often you think, to grow food, you've got have an allotment or something like that. But there's actually these little pockets of land around the town that, what is the potential really? So in a way it's a little bit of showpiece hopefully as well. We have to sort of also think a little bit about sort of the, possibly some of the limiting factors of the project. So one of the big limiting factors that was dealt with kind of quite quickly really was all that rubbish in the garden. Other limiting factors might be, okay, so we've got our project, but there are lots of other people using the pub as well, the regular customers, the people, the management, we've got to fit in with what works for them as well, so we don't want to start kind of getting in their way and inconveniencing anybody, and we don't want to kind of start upsetting other users of the pub, the usual customers and that, and the people that actually sit in the garden in the summer and stuff. So all those kind of things we had to kind of think about that were limiting factors. And there are also kind of our resources. What sort of resources did we have to hand? Again, it's things like, the pub itself, the space itself, local schools, and some other resources I'll talk about as we go along. So, start to think in terms of the design now of this project. So, one of the crucial things really was about having a timeline really of sort of the various stages of kind of what needed doing. So I think that, you know, if you are thinking in terms of anything like this yourselves, actually sorting out a timeline of the order of doing things, and I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute, but that's probably one of the most crucial things. And sometimes, you know, I included that slide because that is literally just a page in my notebook. You know, you can have these sophisticated charts on, you know, install software and have a little computer base and have like project management software, this, that and the other, or you can just scribble in a notebook like this. And everything that was needed there was, all the information is there for the whole thing really. Okay, so then that first picture I showed you, that picture you saw the little rough drawing with the measurements on, that was the first step really, actually preparing that as a base map and actually scaling up that and drawing that up. So actually, you know, that is the space there that we had to work with. And then it was thinking about some of the, if that's our base map, it's about overlaying information on top of that. So this is about thinking about, you know, where the sun rises and sets at different times of the year. So we can figure out things like how much light we're going to have, where the shady parts are going to be at different kind of times of the year, that kind of stuff. Are people familiar with that kind of sun sector?
No.
Or what that kind of...
No.
Okay. Well, the orange segment basically represents the how much sun the garden will get at the shortest time of year and where the sun will kind of rise and set in relation to the garden. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah.
And the yellow, the other part of the circle, what's in yellow is like the longest part of the year, so that would be like where the sun rises in June, that's where it sets in June. That's where the sun rises in December, and where it sets in December. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it lets you think about, you know, where things can be situated in terms of where you can get sunlight, that kind of stuff. I don't get too technical with any of this, but I just wanted to show that there was a bit of a design process at one point in all this. And from that, we actually thought, you know, probably the best way of going about it would be to put in beds using recycled pallets. I'd seen I meant to include a slide actually. I'd seen a similar project in London a couple of months earlier on a housing estate where they've done like rooftop gardens making beds with recycled pallets. So that was kind of inspiration. And in a way, that's why it was quite important to work out the measurements and get that all kind of quite scaled up, reasonably accurate, because so, you know, once you know the size of the space you're working with, and once you know the size of the pallet, you can work out how many pallets you're going to need, so rather than getting too many or too few. So that's why there was kind of some thinking at this stage, you know, so that was working out, can't remember off the top of my head what the dimensions of the pallets were, but working out with the space from the dimensions, I was able to actually calculate that we needed 36 pallets. So, and here's another little diagram, another overlay, which was actually thinking about movement, as it were, in the garden, and some of those kind of issues there. Saying, you know, even though I had the worked out those sun sectors, which are kind of quite idealised, there's also things like there's quite a large building here which casts shade in the afternoon. It was thinking about things like, this is the kitchen here, so I was thinking about, well, we need to put compost, you know, to minimise. Another permaculture principle is you do as little work as possible, and actually understanding that, you know, how people tend to move about. So we thought we actually situate our compost bins here, the kitchen waste can go straight in it, rather than, you know, if it's right down the end here, Del the chef's not going to bother. Does that make sense? So I was just thinking about, you know, working out where water runoff was likely to be and where we could harvest water, that's the blue. Working out, you know, produce that's, if the compost's going out, that's the produce coming in. So I was just thinking about those, some of those factors that might influence or impinge on what we're trying to do. And this is just another overlay which, again, puts the sun in there as well. So it's just showing there are different things that are being thought about in the design process, really. Okay, so yeah, so we worked out we needed 36 pallets. Started asking about, you know, does anyone know where we can get some pallets from? And the standard, yeah, you can get them off industrial estates. There was loads on industrial estates. which is sort of true, but it's a bit more complicated than that, as we found. So we actually did a little expedition around, what's the one near the cemetery? Temple Farm, yeah. So we actually drove on, and you see quite a lot of pallets lying about, but most of them are kind of locked behind, you know, they're gated, you can't actually get to them. So this idea you just drive around and pick up pallets is sort of, especially when you need 36, and when you're getting a kind of sense of what 36 pallets is there, sort of thing. So we actually saw quite a nice pile at one of the units there, which is a place called Dolman's actually. And so we kind of just knocked on the door, or spoke to the foreman, and said it was all right if we take some of these pallets. And he basically said, well, not really, because we actually returned them all, you know, to wherever. So this idea that, you know, actually, there's probably, you know, there's people selling it awful, there's pallets just left and dumped, so most of them are actually returned and reused. But he said you can take some broken ones, so I sort of thought, oh, okay. And we were just going to, you know, take broken ones, and he suddenly said, no. Once we told him what the project was, he said, no, you can have them. And not only said you can have them, he actually got his forklift up and loaded up the back of our minibus. We had to take some of the seats out, but so that was quite nice. It took, even that, you know, even with that kind of quite large minibus, 36 pallets is actually kind of quite a lot of space, and here they all are. So it took a few trips. So we're actually at the point now, we've got all these pallets at the railway now. So it's actually kind of converting them into, you know, into something. So the next stage is like starting to, you know, we kind of start dismantling them. And then we kind of actually came up with this kind of prototype bed here. Because even though we actually thought we're going to build them out of pallets, we didn't actually have a design as such for the bed. So we come up with this kind of quite nice system really that we can see, like, just by taking those runners off of there, which is put there just to hold it in place in that picture, and then just taking another full pallet and placing that on top, we've actually managed to create it's kind of quite raised. Does that make sense?
So you didn't take the cement off, but the floor off?
Cement?
Well, the path,
No, it's all built completely on top of the, yeah. And these runners actually, that were taken from the side, you can actually slide them underneath to be a bit of reinforcement here. So it's actually quite a stable little thing really. And here's our guys starting to nail them together. And again, this is kind of quite nice to actually involve people in this, because, you know, there's people here who've never picked up a hammer or nail in their lives, because, you know, which sounds kind of quite crazy, but you know, for a lot of people with learning disabilities, that has been a historical experience, you know, disempowered and not even having a lot of basic skills quite a lot of the time, which, you know, which is not through any fault of theirs, but for the fault of the kind of how the system has been for most of their lives. So a lot of these guys actually found this really empowering to actually, you know, be involved in this process. And I talked a minute ago about, you know, potential resources, and one I was going to talk about a little bit more. There was kind of quite a lot of infrastructure building needed here, and even though, as I say, our guys were involved, and we involved them as much as possible, there was too much for us to do in the kind of time allocations we had in work time. We needed help, basically. So, talking about potential resources, people moan all the time about Facebook. Oh, isn't Facebook awful, you know, because nobody talks to each other in the real world because they're always on Facebook and they're not really your friends and all this kind of thing. Don't listen to all that. Facebook was amazing in this. The Railway Pub has got its own Facebook page, and I just put announcements or requests on there, you know. Please can we, you know, any volunteers to help create this railway garden project, and we just had so many people, not masses, but people that, because we didn't want masses, so that would mean not works, but so many people just came along and said, yeah, we'll help out, and so it was kind of about just diaring in work days, and that's a guy called Ron, not that Ron, another Ron the welder, who came along, and the skilled carpenter, you know, he was doing a lot of work for us. And again, here's just some more photos of people getting involved and helping out, and just the whole construction. You see it was turning into a bit of a building site for a while, and it was great, you know, just like communication between people. It was mainly through things like Facebook and Twitter and all that sort of thing. And again, there we are, you know, cutting things to shape. And there we go. They're all sort of starting to kind of take shape here a little bit now, as you can see. And, you know, already it's kind of been transformed, isn't it, from what you saw in those first photos. And I just kind of wanted to revisit that photo, that original layout, as a little thing about how it's kind of important not to get, even though, you know, you thought about design quite a lot, that design doesn't always translate to how things are in the real world. As you can see, the idea at that stage was to have compost bins here, and the beds were going to go kind of all the way around like this, yeah? It soon became apparent, once we actually started putting it together, that actually, and that's kind of, this area here, which was originally going to be a bed, just too shady, you can't really do anything in that space. And the other thing we kind of realised, if you're actually standing here, particularly if you're a wheelchair user, there's no way you can reach here if you're there, yeah? So it's just about a thing that things look good on paper sometimes, but they don't always necessarily translate. So it's just a little thing there, just thinking in terms of design, you know, design on paper isn't, you know, you kind of always adapting and improvising when you're actually making it happen in the real world. I just wanted to make that point, really. Okay. And we managed to get this liner from the, someone got involved again, not one of the people that drinks in the pub, who's a landscape gardener, gave us all this liner to line the beds with, which was nice. And there it is being fitted, that's just us putting the liner in, or a couple of people putting the liner in. And another permaculture principle is turn problems into solutions. And I saw this kind of quite a nice example of that, because there was this big overhanging pyracantha, and most people here I guess know what pyracantha is like. It's not the easiest thing to deal with. It's quite unpleasant. So we cut all this pyracantha that was overhanging from the neighbouring garden back, and just didn't know kind of what to do with it, because we had no way of getting the rubbish off, you know, the council wouldn't take it. So that, you know, what we can do with this, you know, couldn't really burn it. So, again, you know, an example of the permaculture principle, turning a problem into solution, is we've basically made it into what we call, what's known sometimes as a Hugelkultur bed, or a German mound bed. We basically just chopped it up and stuck it at the bottom of the, lining the bottoms of the beds, basically. That's actually a Christmas tree that also went in there. So it's actually creating at the bottom of the bed, you've got this kind of quite high carbon waste that's breaking down kind of quite slowly and releasing nutrients, releasing nitrogen over a long period. And it's too far down to be sort of, as most of you are aware about nitrogen robbery, you know, that you don't sort of, it's not really good practice to put woody waste into the soil, because it will lock up the nitrogen. But this is so deep down, it's not affecting the plants that are growing near the top. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So again, I sort of to use that as an example of how, you know, thinking laterally about things, you know, actually, we've got this stuff to get rid of, actually we could turn that into a useful resource. And then, you know, someone else gave us a load of turf, so that kind of went in as well. As you can also see at the top of the picture, some rubble that went in for like drainage. That's actually at the very bottom of the bottom layer. And then some compost that someone gave us, again was donated. That kind of went on top of that. So we were getting the beds fairly full, but we still needed to kind of buy in soil to actually fill, because, you know, as you can imagine, it took quite a bit of soil to fill those beds up. So there we were, had to wait for a delivery at, I think it was about 7 o'clock in the morning, that was taken, waiting for, like, you know, freezing cold it was, you know. So we had these deliveries of topsoil from a local firm, and there we are there's my wife and someone else who's volunteering, barrowing up topsoil at some ungodly hour. And there's just a photo of a barrow being filled with soil. And there you go. So that's the beds then, kind of more or less filled with ready to go sort of thing. Oh yeah, I'll flip back to that, because in terms, I talked about, you know, the thing about having a timeline, and why having a timeline is actually kind of quite crucial, really. And I think that's exemplified by things like, you know, that soil delivery, you know, that you can't really be too, you know, it's a working pub, it's going, you know, they're actually trying to run their business. They didn't want sort of a load of soil arriving and being dumped in the garden, you know, sort of while they're trying to run, you know, they have deliveries, all this, that and the other going on. So it's kind of quite crucial thinking about the timing of that and when that should come in, and, you know, there was no point in ordering the soil before we'd actually built the beds, and there was no point ordering the soil before we actually had the liner in, sort of thing. There's also the whole thing that didn't want it to kind of, you know, the bed's all prepared and then it kind of hangs around for weeks on end either, because then you kind of lose the impetus a little bit. So it's quite crucial getting the timing, and also making sure that, you know, that the day the soil arrived, there will be people there to shift it. You know, so just wanted to, you know, that's why, just wanted to re-emphasise that thing about how crucial sort of timing is, and why it is very crucial to actually have a kind of a timeline like that, and you can see it going in different, there's different arrows going down, how they can kind of tie in with each other. And think about arranging delivery of soil and organising a work day, you have to actually kind of quite well timed really. Okay, so moving on. And also another aspect of that, there's Ron the welder again, doing his welding. Because we actually had these very nice cast iron railings donated to the project as well. But again, it wasn't really a good idea to be putting that last piece of fence in until all the soil had been shifted, because, you know, it's kind of quite a difficult thing. It'd be quite a difficult thing to negotiate. So again, that's why I included that photo there, because it was just making that point about, you know, the last piece of the jigsaw going in really, and, you know, how disastrous it would have been if that piece of fencing had been put in the other way round. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so we'll leave that too much. Here we go. Here's our, so it's all set up now. That's one of the guys from Project 49 actually putting in our very first onion. So that's the very first onion being planted, and there it is, the very first onion. And another thing that's been amazing, you know, is around the whole thing about the pub being a community, is that people have just been donating stuff all the time, you know, all through the summer. You know, I'd go up to the bars to buy a pint and they'd be like, you know, the bar and go, oh, someone's left a packet of seeds, broad bean seeds for you, someone's left some plants for you, that sort of thing. So I just wanted to include that photo. This is just, you know, actually I think this was Ron actually donated these plants, some of the first ones that went in. But that was just some of the many things, you know, it's great that everyone kind of, you know, donating and being interested in what was going on and being kind of quite enthused by it. So that's our very first plants there. And there they are, just put in, planted out. And then, again, people working there doing planting. And again, we actually made that height for the beds, so it's kind of wheelchair. You know, if you're a wheelchair user, it's a good height, it's not too... such a young one of our guys, one of our young ladies, isn't it, a wheelchair user. And there's another, Michael, one of the people who goes to the hub planting some tomatoes. So it's all starting to come together, thing now. And again, there's another one of our guys planting something or other. And you can see it kind of, you know, it's basically the structure's all there now. And again, you know, just think back to those early slides, you know, how things have changed. And, okay, so basically we've done this project without any money whatsoever, or we had absolutely no funding rather, should I say. But there have always, you know, loads of stuff got donated, those railings got donated, the the pallets got donated, people donated their labour, all this, that and the other, water butts were donated. But there were still expenses. The soil cost about 140 quid, something like that. Then there was kind of little things, you know, just, we had the water butts, they had no taps on, so it's things like, you know, they're only a couple of quid, but it all mounts up, you know. Sort of suddenly you're spending like 5 quid here, 10 quid there, and suddenly, and nobody really wants to end up out of pocket over this. So again, it's that permaculture thing, you know, turning a problem into a solution. Decided to put on like a fundraising benefit gig in the pub, and that's like a poster we made for it. And again, you know, it's the whole Facebook thing, you know, just ask any bands want to play, you know, and ended up just turning bands away. I don't know if you can see the big list of bands at the bottom there, but you know, there were too many in the end. I had to sort of say to people, sorry, can't, you know, we can't fit anyone else in. So people were just so keen to be involved with it, sort of thing. And that was back in June of last year, and that's one of the bands that were playing. They were called Point Inaudible, I believe. But we took over the upstairs of the pub. We were putting bands on up there, out in the garden. There were people doing acoustic music and stuff, and it was just a really great community day. You were there, Rob, weren't you?
Yes,
Yeah. Any do you want to say more about that day?
well, I think in a way that's...
If you remember any of it.
Well, it's coming back. I think it's the harvest, isn't it? It's the fruit of a whole project in a way. That's the time when everybody comes together and celebrates. It's the fruition of something. And I think there was diverse music, diverse people. And I think they were celebrating for themselves as well, wasn't it? It was
It was just a really...
the whole pub, the pub community.
Well, it took up 2 floors of the pub and the garden, basically. The music was going on in the garden till long, you know, it was going on to about midnight, I think, still. You know, we weren't making a huge racket and just acoustic instruments, but it was just like a really great day, you know, just people playing guitars and things out in the garden till... Yeah, and it raised more than enough, actually, so I've actually still got some money. It raised about 330 quid, I think, which was... you know, not a vast amount, but it's kind of like certainly enough to meet our costs and enough to put by for those expenses that are going to come up. You know, I think they'll have to buy some more soil because inevitably it's kind of gone down a little bit as it's got older. So, yeah, so there's been a little bit of surplus generated that can be put by for, you know, for future bits of development and stuff. And I think I really want to emphasise that because quite often there's this whole big thing around funding, you know, and all, you know, and the funding quite often comes, you know. I did a workshop with Capital Growth. I don't know if you've heard of Capital Growth. They're sort of London-based, sort of, they're all that community gardens, that sort of thing. And I did a workshop with them guys about, well, you know, how to create a community garden. And the big thing that everyone was always going on about was, well, how are we going to get funding? Yeah, it'd be good to do this, but you've got to get funding. And yeah, but is that going to meet the funders' criteria? And that seemed to be the key, you know, well, not the key, the thing that people were kind of quite hung up on was funding. And it's always tends to be in these sort of thousands of pounds as well. I said, well, you know, we did this for, probably it's cost 150 quid, soil and a few other bits and pieces, you know, but I don't know, I think there's just something about, you know, worrying about the funding later, just do it. And in fact, you know, being forced to think a bit creatively about funding, actually, you know, okay, we could have filled in some form to some charity or other or some organisation and got, like, you know, X amount of money, but, you know, this is a lot more fun than filling in forms, you know. So, just wanted to kind of emphasise that, you know, there's creative ways of raising money sometimes that aren't just about, you know. Anyway, it's all kind of starting to come together now. You can see those plants that were put in are all starting to kind of grow now. And there's some beans and some salad there, mixed salad. Again, we just kind of, one of the first things, you know, you can get those little bags of you get them in sort of Wilkinson's and places like that, those little bags of salad, mixed salad, and it's kind of, there's quite a lot of perlite type stuff. You know the stuff I mean? They're only about £1 a bag, you know, you get them in the pound shop, and we just like broadcast that around, and mainly it's just to create a bit of soil cover. Just want to cover the soil so everything's got established. But as you can see, it's all doing really well there. There's a couple of cucumbers that we're sort of just put in as well, that are just quite new. But yeah, this stuff was doing, you know, we've got loads and loads of lettuce and other big salad leaves. And that was that red orc, was it, Ron? You Damon? Yeah. So again, it's all, and there's the cucumbers starting to grow. And sweet corn, nasturtiums, sunflowers, courgettes, and beans onto the side there. And there, again, there was someone that in the pub just gave me these plants, lab beans, they were called, which had this like really beautiful purple pod that was you know, quite nice and stir fries, things like that. So
what's it called again, Graham?
Lab bean, L-A-B. Anyone familiar with lab bean?
I've heard of it.
No, I'd never heard of them before, but no, in fact they look really beautiful as well. They've got those really nice sort of pink flowers and those nice purple beans. So it's quite unusual stuff. And again, it's just something, you know, one of the customers in the pub goes, oh, some lab beans. Alright, stick them in, see what happens. And good for the wildlife as well. That's the photo I took out in the garden of a bee, one of the sunflowers. And there's one of our harvests. So, courgettes, runner beans, spinach, beetroots, tomatoes, and other bits and pieces. So, you know, so again that. Oh yeah, and I mentioned at the start there that one of the outcomes to the pub was about, you know, creating. We'd be growing some kind of organic veg and that for the pub. We actually thought about that. We thought, well, actually, that could put us in kind of a bit of an awkward position, or could put the pub in an awkward position. In terms of, they were saying, you know, realistically, they had so much stuff going through the kitchen that we might be able to provide food for one day. What would they do for the rest of the year? So that would have been slightly token, and it could have left the pub in a bit of a weird position ethically, in that people kind of volunteer, you know, unpaid work, they're then selling the stuff in the kitchen. And we just thought, just to sort of, because you never know, you know what people are like in this world of ours now. So we just thought, to actually circumvent anything like that, that if we do grow any surplus, we just give it away to like homeless charity or something like that. As in the event we haven't actually grown enough this year to do that, or sorry, last year rather. But again, it's one of those things that, you know, it seemed a great idea at the start, and the more we kind of thought, and it was actually Dave, the club manager, who thought we might actually be in a slightly odd and ethically compromised position there, so just to avoid anything like that. So I just thought it was worth mentioning that as well. I mean, other people might make different decisions, but that was our decision and made for those reasons. As Ron said, you know, the last couple of slides here, you know, this is what, you know, isn't really about the food, you know. Okay, we do grow food, we grow quite a nice amount of food, we've got used in people's cooking groups and life skills groups and that kind of thing. But it is much more about, you know, the people, you know, elements, you know, the people care side of things, you know, and how it's been, you know, a really nice project for getting people engaged with the community. Because what we kind of do, you know, we'll we'll work out in the garden for an hour or so, and then we usually actually go in the bar, and some of the guys, some people have a cup of tea, some of the guys buy themselves a beer and stuff. There's always kind of musical instruments and that lying around in the railway. There's a piano, and people have a go on the piano, and people pick up a guitar and bang a tune out and stuff. And everyone's kind of getting to be known actually in the railway. You know, sort of, you know, that they come in and it's like, hello mate, how you going? And you know, so it's really integrated. People who might otherwise have been quite isolated and apart from them. And I say it's a music pub, so there are a couple of guys who started coming to this caught on. So well, they music here in the evening. So, yeah, and they started coming to the the gigs in the evening. There's the guy there with his back to the camera, with his hands on his hip. He comes to the jazz every Wednesday night now. He loves jazz, and But in the past Wednesday night he'd go to sort of the club or something, like Wednesday Club or something, or just staying and watch East Anglia or whatever. But now every Wednesday he's down the railway watching the jazz, and it's always like a pint. So to me that's a much more important yield, maybe an indirect one from this project than just about the onions or carrots or lettuce for grain. And the final slide, actually, bit of success. We didn't even know about this. We got entered for as part of Anglia in Bloom for their as part of Southend in Bloom and Southend Council's entries. I don't really understand the ins and outs of it. But anyway, we got nominated and we won. We actually won the prize for Best Special Needs Garden in East Anglia, and that was up against people in Ipswich and Lowestoft and Norwich and goodness knows where. So yeah, that was great, and that's part of the team. That some of the guys that spend time down there. And we won a couple of other awards since then. We actually won Southend Borough Council's Stars Award for community something or other. You remember what it is, Sherry?
I can't remember which category it was now. I switched off by then, there were so many different
But yeah, so it's community cohesion, something like that. But yeah, we won, so we're sort of winning some awards, and we're actually thinking about how to make sure we kind of keep that emphasis up and start winning, go for next year's as well. So, in a way, that's the story of the Railway Garden, so, as it stands at the moment. So, yeah, any questions?
That's very interesting.
Clarifications. Sorry.
Good going.
Oh, thank you. Cheers.
Are you still able to compost, Graham? Oh, sorry, did I interrupt you?
Sorry,
I'm still composting from the kitchen.
We are actually, that's something, again, it's about, there's something here about clear communication as well. In that initial picture where showed where the compost bins were going to be, the compost actually is down the other end, even though that whole thing about will Dell be bothered to walk up and down. We actually put it at that end because actually we suddenly thought compost bin, kitchen door, rats, so there's all those sort of things in the equation. So we are composting stuff, but not where I initially said.
I thought flies might,
And flies, yeah. And another thing, I don't know if you saw in that slide that was, I'll go back to it very quickly, which again is about how it's good to have the correct information sometimes, or full information. You see here the water butts are going to be located here. That's where we're initially going to install them. And when I said that, basically Dave, who's the manager of the pub, I was saying, is there anything you don't want us to do, Dave? Just tell us what you don't want us to do, because we don't want to interfere with the running of the pub. We go, no, do you like? Garden's yours, do you like? Okay, you sure? Yeah, anything. So I drew up with plans to install these water butts here, because there were downpipes and what have you. And we're just going to go ahead and start putting them in, talk about having the correct, having full information. No, don't you like? So, what are you doing? So, well, we're going to be putting the water butts there. Well, don't put them there, I'm knocking the door through there so people can go in and out the garden. So, why didn't you tell us that? At the stage when I was asking you, what's your, So it's really important to actually have that, the whole thing about, they call it the client interview, where you're kind of gathering information. So again, it's about things, being subject to change at sort of short notice. So. Okay, sorry, was the lady there?
It seemed that one of the initial things was to use it for food.
Mm-hmm.
Does it, apart from it going to the various people, does it go back to the hub, for instance, for particular food or meals?
No,
there isn't a sort of central place that it goes for food.
No, that's what I'm saying. We took a decision not to actually use it in the pub and that.
No, I don't know if you won't use it in the pub, but I wondered if it went to the, I can't remember, the hub something.
So the hub, yeah, it goes back to most of the people that they take some home, or a lot of it goes back to the centre and
Yeah.
gets used in cooking groups, because people are doing life skill groups,
So they
they're
use
learning
it
to
at
cook and stuff.
cooking at the hub.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's what happens to most of it, yeah.
Yeah.
But other bits, you know, people grind a bit here, you know, they just take it home or eat it on the spot. So, and we have got some pots of herbs and that, so they do use those in the pub. They take a handful of, you know, chives or parsley or whatever, but I don't really want to be too fussed about that.
Sorry, we had no trouble with vandals drunk in the pub and coming out and...
Touch wood not. No. No, so, we have got, it is kind of gated off from the main garden. So it's like, actually if you know the railway, we've got this lane bit, but the rest of it is kind of the main beer garden here. So it's not kind of integral, we've actually got a gate to sort of, it'd be easy enough to climb over it, but touch wood, so far it hasn't happened. And, you know, because it is a concern, you know, do get quite a lot of drunken people going up and down the road, and it is out of kind of public view, so it would take one person to get over and they could do quite a lot of damage, but let's, you know, worry about that when it happens. They are also thinking about installing some proper gates on the pub, back garden, you know, as a general thing, but I think that's just one of those. We'll worry about it when it happens. And there's nothing there of any value as such. So. I think, yeah, one of the main things is, you know, what I'd really like to see is this transferred to other places. It was sort of...
I didn't realise, of course, you know, when we were talking about it, that it's such an easy idea to transfer, isn't it? There's I got an email from, was it the North Benfleet Parish Council, I think it was. I don't know if there's anybody here from North Benfleet, is there? Somebody was supposed to come or talking about coming. So presumably, you know, that they were thinking about doing something similar up there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just about get up and do it, really, is the main message here, really. You know, it was easy, it was cheap, go and do it, as an old punk band once sang. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, it's, you know, when I say it was easy, it had to be thought about. There was that whole thing, you know, I really emphasise the whole thing about communication and timelines and having a, you know, an order of doing things. So you do have to, you know, it is kind of hard work, but it's easy. Does that make sense? And there are just so many, you know, just became aware of how many of these sort of places there are around, backyards behind shops and little bits of land that aren't being used for anything much at the moment, and why can't they be turned into productive food growing land that's, apart from anything else, looks nice. So, you know, I think that's maybe one of the crucial, you know, if you go from that first slide to the last slide, you know, maybe
Is there like any way, like what you're saying about, you know, utilising this all over the place, is there any way of like maybe compiling a list of areas and approaching these people? Because I think it would be like a really good idea, you know, to kind of spread it out across Southend, but it's, there are many places, and I think if they knew how relatively easy it was, you know, in terms of costs, it's, you know, 150, even 300 quid, it's not be all and end all, and things can be done to raise that money in a relatively short time as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Is there a way of compiling like a database of, or, you know, setting up something up to approach these people?
Probably.
I tell you what, my son-in-law has set up a website which is free to register called Builder to Builder. And I had a bit in our newsletter some time ago because he wanted to be inclusive and for gardeners as well, wishing, for instance, you know, to find somewhere to purchase, you know, the pallets and things like that. So that might be, you know, that is on our website. It's called Builder to Builder.
Okay. But there's also things like, you know, there's a Southend Food Growers Facebook group, things like that might be, you know, good way of
Matt King, who runs the Trust Links here, I'm sure he'd be interested, wouldn't he? He's very interested in this sort of thing, because they've just started a new allotment over at Shoebury, haven't they? Yeah, they've just started a bit of land very similar to this, but it's down Shrewsbury way.
I personally think it'd be good for anyone here aware of things like Southend in transition, the Transition Town project, which is all about, you know, becoming more self-reliant as communities and that. So I think that would probably be their kind of their role, you know, or for someone to take an initiative under that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, you know. It's up to someone to do it again, you know. So.
I ask because I'm a community worker and I'm also a youth worker, so I'm always up for ideas with the community and being young with young people. Which is what, you know, passion is with young people. So teaching them where vegetables come from, you know, self-sustaining, healthy eating. Ultimately, just healthy eating. So you know, I've been more than willing to get involved you know, in a process of providing something.
Absolutely, yeah, great, yeah.
Cool. Just teaching them the basics of basic food. We'd started something over at St Luke's and kind of had a joke. So what we planted was potatoes, and there's chips over there, and there's crisps there. And it's like, oh really? I don't know. And actually, you know, I know kids can be quite gullible in it, and I mean it in the nicest sense, but they kind of did believe that, you know, different potatoes, different things. And
absolutely, yeah. And I just think, you know, this kind of thing feeds, you know, I think there's so much negativity around and people are so easy, you know, so quick to sort of look at the negatives. I think, you know, to actually just create something really positive, actually creates a slightly different story, if you like, or a different narrative, you know, like I said right at the start, people saying, oh, you know, Southend, what a dump, you know, and, well, no, is that dump? Don't know, that's dump to me, you know what I mean, you know.
It also encourages people to look after their area as well, and then show a bit more respect for it and have a bit of
absolutely, and it, you know, it becomes viral. I mean, that's the hope for this has become like viral, you know.
But it's the drunkenness, isn't it, caused by the clubs, that because they all give them these late licences, and that's what's caused it, isn't it?
I don't know, I mean, this is right en route to, you know, some of the main nightclubs in the town. People go up and down those back alleys, and we've had none.
Didn't they start something? It was your Hackney, I think it was, where their initiative by the council. I think they gave young people seeds. I think I might have this a bit wrong, but young people was encouraged to just go around and just basically throw the seeds everywhere. And it was like they could kind of plot a timeline as such to see where the kids have been. All these like yellow, I can't remember what plants they were now, but just little things like that, you know.
There's some seeds here if you want some. Just got a small donation just to you, that'd be nice, but you know. They're here, all right.
Is there people from the pub being inspired to kind of start growing their own food, or?
What you mean, like customers?
Yeah, there's other people sort of interacting.
Who knows? Possibly, you know. I say it's quite interesting to find out how many people are already growing food, because the number of people that said, "Oh, I've got some leftover beans or some leftover cabbages or whatever," you know, that people had left over from their own allotments or gardens or whatever. So that's been, you know, so. But whether other people, you know, hopefully other people have thought, yeah. You know.
Is it still being utilised at this time of year? Are you growing it?
Not a lot this time of year, I must admit. It sort of needs a bit of tidying. We have got some overwintering cabbages and some overwintering onions, but obviously it's not looking all that inspiring at this time of year. But and it's a bit wet and cold, so people tending to be in the pub rather than outdoors. No, I don't want to be out here. Let's go in the pub. No, I don't like it.
We give the smokers a packet of seeds.
What's that?
Give the smokers a packet of seeds.
Depends what they're smoking.
They might be there for a long time.
Actually, hemp has all sorts of wonderful uses, doesn't it? So
Trust you to think they meant that.
that's what I was thinking, anyway. Hemp milk, delicious. Make all sorts of, you can make bags and all sorts of things, all sorts of delicious things growing it.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay.
How do you find that the people in this communities get on with gardening? So I've worked with a similar project, and we've got some people who are not very enthusiastic about getting on with, and others who are wildly enthusiastic, but you know, might have cerebral palsy, which is not great coordination when you've got a tiny little seedling you're trying to plant out. Kind of doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's different. There's some people want, you know, just their idea of gardening is to sit on the chair and smoke a fag. That's, you know, one of the guys in those photos. That's his contribution to gardening. Other people are really enthusiastic, like one of the guys in those photos, Billy, you just wind him up and let him go. I see things like weed, you know, pull up some weeds that were coming up and left him getting on with that, and I looked round and he'd gone. I thought, where is he? And someone said he's down there. He was down the road pulling all the weeds up out the pavement. You know, they just wouldn't. So yeah, you got some people just actually very enthusiastic, and other people kind of, you know, like everyone else in society. You know, some people have different. People have their own agendas, I guess. You know, it's a group. You know, some people are just clearly there because it's an excuse to go in the pub and have a pint. Other people are kind of quite active. You know, the guy there with the. You can see he's taking quite an interest in it, you know, and he's kind of quite a keen, enthusiastic gardener who really, you know, gets stuck in. But, yeah, so everyone's a bit different sort of thing, really.
I think also that this type of style of gardening is a community. You're gardening with your mates, your friends. I mean, I've worked with a lot of young people with cerebral palsy. They just love being out in the elements, you know. You put the gear on and they'll be there, and they're part of it. And sometimes there is a task that they can partake or share or something.
Yeah,
so it's about you thinking. You know, they don't have to plant seed because that's not the only thing. You know, when you learn about money, I remember they taught 1p, 2p. No, forget it. Give them a fiver. Here's what you've got to buy. Get some change. You start from a bigger picture. Because they're going to spend their whole life counting 1, 2, 3, and it's depressing. No, it's no way. That's not learning, and I think that's fantastic. It's a fantastic area.
Do you have a planting? Do you have? Sorry, Ron. Do you have a planting sort of schedule for each year, or are you sort of pretty sort of free and easy?
Pretty free and easy. I think one thing we've got to do really is think about. Coordinate more with the cooking groups. What do you actually use in your cooking groups and grow more of that? I mean, for this first, it did tend to be everything went in anyway, and it's very kind of, like I say, you know, people just you fill the bed up and then someone gives you a load more stuff, and it's just so we're squeezing it in left, right, and centre. So it's probably a little bit overcrowded this year, but yeah, I mean, don't get too structured about it. I suppose it would make sense to grow stuff that the cooking groups are going to kind of use more of, you know, so yeah, but that stuff's kind of emergent really, it'll just come, you know, at the time, I think.
We know where you can get your potatoes.
That's one thing we don't really have space to grow, unfortunately, sorry. And also it's quite hard because it's raised beds.
We've got onions as well.
Yeah, right.
We've got onions, raised onions.
Yeah, okay.
I'll undersell some people.
And I'm rather hoping that we'll run out of money again next year, so we put on a big party again. It's an excuse.
But I think it's a fantastic sort of set of connections. I mean, I think it's I don't know, it's just permaculture, DIY culture. It's just in the middle of a town, you know, it's urban, it's easy, it's fairly cheap, and I think there's a lot of joy in the whole process, you know, creativity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I don't know, I think we ought to say thank you to Graham for
Yeah,
sharing that.